This is the Gigabyte Aorus RTX 2080 Xtreme graphics card. It's definitely a beefcake, and an odd looking one at that. Judging from initial impressions on Twitter, you're likely either to love it or absolutely hate it. Personally, I love the design. I've got a special thing for triple fan coolers, and this one brings a little something extra to the table, these beautiful LEDs. Now, while they might not look like much at first, especially seeing as though one LED per fan exists, right? Just one LED on one fan blade per fan, there are many different effects to take advantage of, and I encourage you to watch this video right here if you haven't already, because it's where we discuss many of those lighting effects. But I still think that this card could look better. When we last met up with Gigabyte in Miami, where they debuted the card, I asked them if they plan to release different colors, like white or silver. I thought that the lighting scheme could benefit from a lighter shroud color, and I think that's an okay assumption to make, but to my disappointment, the plan was to stick with just black. That's where this video comes in. Time to paint another graphics card. So the first step in this process was to disassemble the entire card down to bare PCB. At this point, I wasn't sure if I wanted to just paint the fan shroud or the entire frame, so I disassembled everything. For a card like this, you'll also want to remove any metal accents and logos before painting for obvious reasons. You want to keep those bare. They're usually just held in by a few screws. By the way, you can take advantage of this time to replace the stock thermal compound with something a bit more mainstream if you wish, although RTX cards in general aren't going to be limited thermally. By nature of this card's design, you can remove, though, the entire heatsink and reinstall that along with the fan array without needing to attach any section of the plastic frame. I decided in the moment only to paint the shroud since I plan to turn the card vertically with a cable mod riser, resulting in the backplate being completely hidden. So with all of the smaller accents and details removed, I cleaned up the shroud and removed as much dust and debris as I could. You can also take this time to mask off any sensitive areas if you so desire. As for paint, I chose Rust-Oleum's high-performance engine enamel. It certainly isn't as removable as, say, Plastidip, but the finish is much cleaner with only a few coats, in my opinion, and typically won't require any extra layers of gloss. So in my experience, Plastidip is also considerably more sensitive to ambient temperatures. I've used both, probably used Plastidip more to be honest, but when I use Plastidip, especially when it's cold outside, which it's not really anymore, but when I first tried to do this with the white Plastidip, it just didn't stick well, didn't adhere well to the plastic, and it would kind of harden in these clumps, and it just wasn't a smooth finish. I switched to the Rust-Oleum enamel, and under the same conditions practically, that paint just stuck to the surface much better. So if you're a little concerned about that, maybe you're a first-time painter, I would say Plastidip is going to be more forgiving because you can remove it, right? It's just like a peelable plastic. So in that sense, you could just keep retrying over and over. But I would say go for the Rust-Oleum because it's going to, first off, give you a cleaner finish. It's going to be easier to start with, and you can practice on practically anything beforehand. So if you're that concerned about messing it up the first time, just take some small objects you don't care about, paint those first, get used to the coats, and then you can move on to the more important objects. Now, as for my painting studio, just a single box and a paint can cap to keep the card propped up. I highly recommend you paint these components while they're suspended at least somewhat in the air. Otherwise, you could have paint stick to the box or whatever you're painting on, and that could totally ruin your finish. This is especially the case for Plastidip. It tends to be really sticky even when it dries. Shake the can rigorously for a few minutes, make sure the ball inside is moving freely, and then try a few test sprays at different distances. I try to stay around 8 to 10 inches away. Any closer and you're likely to overspray, resulting in unwanted puddles of especially wet paint that you never really get to dry in a consistent fashion. Now, you shouldn't expect a clean finish after your first coat. Even if you have a few areas that aren't completely covered, I mean, even if they're somewhat covered, that's okay. Come back for the next coat and emphasize those areas first. Work on getting things as smooth as possible over time, and that's why staying further away is better in the long run. One of the best things about this paint is that it dries fairly quick at around 15 minutes per coat, but that doesn't mean you should be handling the shroud after said time frame. You could still leave fingerprints and oils in the finish while the layer is soft, which is where the paint cap underneath again comes in handy. You can grab that and rotate the shroud as many times as necessary to ensure that you've covered as much of the surface as possible. So again, that's 15 to 20 minutes between coats, rotate, spray, and repeat until the desired finish is obtained. Make sure you cover the corners of the shroud, the sharp edges, the crevices, and even the inside of the shroud, since you'll be able to see underneath when the card is turned vertically in your build, assuming you're going to. It'd be a sin, in my opinion, to not turn this card vertically because it looks so good sideways. Just make sure the paint on the other side, though, if you flip it upside down, has thoroughly dried first. I know it seems like I'm spewing a ton of directions at once, but I want to make sure that I cover all my bases here, because painting isn't something that most people can just pick up and be good at the first time, especially if we're talking about spray painting, because every can is different and all the paints are going to set differently and every object in question creates new challenges. So if you're concerned, again, like, I'm not trying to scare you away from it. In fact, I encourage you to an extent to do this, because you can, you know, make these things kind of your own, make them look even more custom than before. But I suggest practicing on other things first. Work on getting that consistent finish and then move on to the more important parts later. The silver enamel I chose for this project actually turned out quite well and nearly matches our Corsair Dom Platts, AIO, and Gigabyte motherboard. I've linked all these components, by the way, in the video description, so if you're interested in building something similar, you'll have a frame of reference. This is not a cheap build by any means. It's actually the one that I edit with consistently and occasionally play games with too, hence the smaller 144 Hz monitor right here to my right. It's just a 24-inch 1080p monitor. All in all, though, this is one of the more powerful editing rigs that I've worked with, and I'm really impressed with how snappy the 9900K is with its IGP when scrubbing the timeline or rendering. The RTX 2080 is good, especially for encoding and streaming, which I do, again, a lot of, playing with this ultra-wide 1440p resolution, or just looking sharp in the background. I mean, who doesn't like that look? I know you guys were kind of upset, giving, you know, some of you joking about seizures or whatever, but it looks worse on camera because, again, I gotta sync the shutter speed up with the rotation of the fans. And so because the fan LEDs are blinking, right, to kind of sync up with the human eye based on how fast they're rotating, it really has to be in sync with the shutter speed. In this case, it's definitely not. So that's why it looks really spotty. But to the human eye, in real life, it looks very flush, very consistent, only a small degree of blinking there. So you can see here, if I alter the shutter speed of my camera, I can make this thing look much smoother, and that is in fact how it looks again in real life. And so again, in my opinion, now that we've painted this shroud silver, the lights have just a more reflective surface to work with. So I think that I've improved the overall aesthetic of the card, and look, I'm not knocking on Gigabyte for omitting white or silver variants. I don't think that's a negative. It's not something that I would like give 4 stars instead of 5 or whatever on a review site like Amazon or Newegg. I imagine most would still be interested actually in a neutral black version. And hey, at least they made disassembly a relatively simple process. So I've worked with other cards that are a completely different story, and that's a pain in the butt, and we don't usually like to paint those kinds of cards. But yeah, this one's actually pretty simple to disassemble despite its kind of ominous like feature set, like what it looks like. It looks like it would be a pain to disassemble. It is not. That's a good thing, especially for us painters out there. So with that, I'd like to know what you think about this color scheme, the finish, the overall theme of the build. Obviously the idea here was for black and silver, so if you're not a fan of either of those colors, then yeah, it's not going to look too great. We've got matching cable mod cables, and heck, we've even got these fan blades in gray from Corsair. So I really tried to match as much as possible, and it was definitely a fun one to build. I'm sure I'll do it again soon. With that, I'll ask you guys to leave a like or dislike depending on what you think. Your feedback is definitely appreciated. Subscribe for more content like this, and consider becoming a member for special perks, including dedicated live streams, unique badges, and more. I'm going to try to be more involved on the member side of things here soon. This is Science Studio. Thanks for watching, and thanks for learning with us.